afternoon, my beautiful babes and babettes. I am your resident active advocate, and at least something, looking at you, is looking beautiful, because that, as I point out my window, that is a poor excuse for a day. I woke up at midnight to it raining cats and dogs, friggin' Noah's flood style, and it hasn't really let up since then. Good thing my office is not flooding, and yes, that has happened before. Not fun, but anyway, we're here to do something much lovelier than the weather, which is to continue reading our copy of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's very, very pretty. Alright, so, maximizing the document. Yesterday we left off at Article 37. And now I put on my real voice. Article 37, subdivided. 1. Indigenous peoples have the right to the recognition, observance, and enforcement of treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements concluded with states and their successors, and to have states honor and respect such treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements. Okay. In the words of Buffy St. Marie, treaties do not change, okay? There are definitely laws surrounding Indigenous peoples that have changed over time. For example, the closure of the residential schools, and also them being given the right to vote in Canada, which they did not have, I want to say prior to the 1950s or 1960s, which is even later than women got the right to vote, which I think is ridiculous. Obviously ridiculous, and we have come a ways since then, but the problem that I see nowadays is that treaties are not honored. Okay, there have been very negative instances of oppression, of, systemic racism, systemic hierarchy building, always with Indigenous people at the bottom, it would seem. And just an FYI, if I have not already mentioned this in past videos, the residential school system was a violation of a number of treaties. Treaties do not change, even over the course of generations, as that article made clear. Even as states change, if the country of Canada itself were to become something different, still the treaties were not subject to change, would not be subject to change, okay? That's how this works, because, they were made for a reason, and a lot of treaties did bad things, but a lot of treaties did good things. For example, with Indigenous people, because of their traditional way of life, there is no official hunting season, but many of the treaties that were made in terms of land agreements were unfortunately set up to, neutralize the threat that Indigenous people are. I don't agree with that, obviously, because, look around you, okay? Look around you. So, actually, what I really need to do is to read up on the treaties that are effective within my province in Canada, because Ontario is freaking huge, okay? It's bigger than Texas. So there are going to be a lot of different people groups living in this province, and a lot of different treaties governing them. But what I would like to do is just to see how the treaties have affected the way of life for the different people groups in Ontario throughout the history of the treaties themselves, which, some of them go back hundreds of years, as far as I'm aware anyway. Like I say, research pending. Whoop. Okay. 2. Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as diminishing or eliminating the rights of Indigenous peoples contained in treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements. All right, this is pretty much self-explanatory, but it's also very similar language to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I do believe that phrase was repeated throughout the TRC more than once. So you can definitely see how this is kind of like a co-document with the TRC, or a jumping off point from the TRC. I think it's easier to understand because it's also a lot shorter, but it's also much more idealistic than the TRC. The TRC is much more in depth, but this is more like, here's what things ought to look like right now, you know? And I appreciate idealism. Idealism is not realism, frankly, if you ask me. Yep. Maximize. Okay, Article 38. Oh, it's just teeny. States, in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples, shall take the appropriate measures, including legislative measures, to achieve the ends of this declaration. Okay, you can kind of tell by the language that we're getting on towards the end of this thing, and yes, we are, because this only has 46 articles in it, which is why I did 6 in the first day, and my numbers have been not multiples of 5, which has kind of been messing with my not at all mathematics-oriented brain. But yeah, basically the language of these documents is that the documents themselves must not only be, you know, put into practice to begin with, but then once they are, actually to be upheld. And the reason why this needs to be put in these documents is because of the history on this continent. Deals have not been kept up, treaties have been ignored. As I say, the residential schools was a just blatant way of ignoring and sidelining quite a number of treaties that were made with quite a number of people groups. So basically what this is more or less an account, or keeping us to account, keeping settlers to account, in the ways in which we have failed. And I'm not saying every white person is a failure when it comes to Indigenous relationships, not necessarily, okay? What you do now matters. This sounds like a PSA. Maybe it needs to be a PSA. What you, yes you at home, what you do does matter. And I'm dropping my playful tone there, because it really and truly does. You know, you can't start with the federal government. It's too big and too much up its own butt, if you ask me. You got to start with you, all right? And I mean, I heard a talk during sensitivity training yesterday. The reason why I was in a rush yesterday was because of workplace training, but there was a talk given about our college's relationship to Indigenous people and Indigenous students and the land. And what the presenter said actually is what I'm saying to you now, that it has to start with you, because it can't start with anyone else. It's not going to. So, okay, this is a statement made by a Mormon leader. I don't like Mormonism. I think it's a cult. But the guy did say, if not you, who? If not now, when? All right? So, for what that is worth on its own, taken out of the context of Mormonism, if not you, who? If not now, when? Just try. Seriously, just try. That's really the only thing that we can ask at this point. And I shouldn't say we, because I'm not Indigenous, oh my God. But people who are attempting to do right by one another. And I hope that I can count myself at least in that rank. All right, maximizing document. Article 39. Indigenous peoples have the right to have access to financial and technical assistance from states and through international cooperation for the enjoyment of the rights contained in this declaration. Yep, okay, so basically cross-border people have rights, and you know how I explained yesterday that there are several very large Indigenous nations that are divided by both international, provincial, territorial, and state borders. Every single person, regardless of their boundaries on this continent, of the arbitrary boundaries that were set up by the colonists, although not arbitrary because a lot of them, as I said yesterday, were made in order to separate groups from each other. Anyone on any side of any of those boundaries has the right to the same quality of life as anyone else. And I'm talking about a good and sustainable quality of life, all right? I keep going back to the clean water issue, but that's a really big issue. We have to address that. For the love of the gods, what century is this? Work with me here. All right. Article 40. Indigenous peoples have the right to access and promote decision through just and fair procedures for the resolution of conflicts and disputes with states or other parties, as well as to effective remedies for all infringements of their individual and collective rights. Such a decision shall give due consideration to the customs, traditions, rules, and legal systems of the Indigenous peoples concerned, and international human rights. This one is really freaking important because, in my interpretation of this at least, it is talking about reconciliation. And we have read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission together. And there is a monumental amount of work to still be done in order to attain reconciliation between the colonizers/settlers and Indigenous people. There's nothing on their end that needs to be reconciled, okay? If I have to pound this into people's heads, I will. But they are the oppressed minorities, plural, who have been oppressed by people who wanted their land, who wanted their resources, but who did not want their cultures, their languages, their religions, their ceremonies, their dances, their rituals, everything. You know, everything that makes them who they are. And I'm not going to use that in the past tense because these are living people. Everything that makes them who they are was attempted, at least, to be taken from them. However, everything that they have, you know, that was also taken from them. And that was, unfortunately, much more successfully done than actual integration. I use integration, but that is too soft a term. I should say assimilation, murder, brainwashing. That's exactly what these things were. You know, the residential schools were only schools in name, all right? Basically, they were concentration camps for children. Concentration camps for children. If I have to repeat that for emphasis, I will. All right? We need to work on these relationships and stop curtailing people's rights, because that's what we've been doing for the past couple hundred years. And you don't see this getting much better, okay? We can talk about all the progress that's happened. Well, there aren't any residential schools anymore. Yeah, okay, cool. But what else? All right? Like, a lack of pure evil does not mean good. All right? Not necessarily. That whole system was pure evil, and you can see the effects of it throughout all the multiple generations. And I mean, obviously, there are people living now who are survivors of that system. There are people living now who lost friends and relatives to that system. And, you know, the more people you can talk to on a first-person basis, not get all your information through white chick, all right? The more people you seek out to talk to about their lived experiences of either being a survival of the residential schools or having lost someone, or both, because both is also a distinct possibility here. Yeah, I mean, the last residential school in Canada closed in 1997. That's not that long ago. I was 7 in 1997. I remember being 7 years old. and, going to Sparks and Brownies and, being a young kid at school trying to make friends. Normal stuff. Not suffering through literal torture. All right? What we need to understand is that this was a crime against humanity, that the effects of that crime against humanity continue to be seen today, not only in the survivors, but also in their children, because generational trauma is a very distinct possibility when coming out of such a terrible and horrific system as that. We have to recognize treaty rights, which was not done. We have to recognize not only that, but also to recognize the inherent personhood of the people sharing their continent with us. I say their continent, okay? Because even though a lot of nations don't lay land claims, as far as I'm aware, regardless of whether they do or not, they were here first. All right. Gonna keep going. All right, Article 41, and this is the last for today. The organs and specialized agendas of the United Nations system and other intergovernmental organizations shall contribute to the full realization of the provisions of the Declaration through the mobilization, inter alia, of financial cooperation and technical assistance, ways and means of ensuring participation of Indigenous peoples on issues affecting them shall be established. All right, so as I just read, this one is talking primarily about financial and technological assistance. Yeah, again, let's go back to the clean water thing. If there was proper technology on these reserves, that would not be an issue. That would not even be, at the back of a person's mind. That wouldn't even have to be considered. I can turn on my tap and get this. All right? You can see through this bottle. Look how clear that is. Right? A lot of people can't. And I mean, come on, it's the most basic necessity of life other than air. And just the fact that the reserves have been left behind in the 1800s, early 1900s, basically on a technological level, does not speak well to the care that we as the settlers/colonizers, depending on your worldview, should be taking of the people whom we have thus far been oppressing. All right? Not only do I say that we need to take better care of the people whose lands we stole, but just on a freaking human-to-human basis, and y'all know I'm a humanist, just on a human-to-human basis, like, consider them your relatives. Think of them as your relatives. If you are white, living in a Christian country, regardless of whether you were actually raised Christian, you know that there's this cultural ethos about knowing people for who they are by how they treat other people. The whole concept of just interrelational things going on between people, I'm sorry, I'm not articulating this very well. What I am saying is that if we were to treat other people whom we perceive as lesser than us, if we were to actually treat them like equals, these would not be problems, and I would not be sitting here doing this right now. Not that I don't enjoy doing this, because I do, because the word needs to get out, regardless of who's doing it. It's not my place to say what the Indigenous nations themselves should be doing, but speaking as a white, on behalf of other whites, like I have the right to do that either, but it's not fair that we should be treating the people whom we should care about, because we put them in these bad situations to begin with, not fair that we should be treating them as if they are still worth less than us. That's BS in my mind, okay? They're human beings. We're all human beings. Is it that difficult to play nice? Really, is it that difficult to play nice? I don't understand why, when we are children, we are told to share, we are told to give, we are told to love, we are told to play nice with the other kids. All right? But then when we're not kids anymore, that doesn't seem to apply. Why? Why does that change? And when does it change? Where's that special little line where that changes? I don't get it. But that's me being an idealist. Maybe that's not a thing that should have to be, that we should have to give up on what someone might consider a childish tendency, which is to share and to love and to give. We shouldn't have to give up on those things because those are the bases of pretty much all morality that we claim to stand by. It's not fair, quite frankly. And that sounds childish of me to say, but it's not fair. And we need to make it fair. Because if we're going to assert that we are the ones in power, we need to use that power for the benefit of other people. All right? I mean all other people. You can't hoard power, okay? It has to be something that is dispersed. If you hoard it, it's not going to go anywhere. Same with money, but that's a conversation for another time. You guys know that I'm anti-capitalist at this point. All right, so that is our talk for today. I will do so again tomorrow, but just so y'all know, Friday I have an entire 6-hour day of training, so there will not be a Friday video. I will remind y'all of this again tomorrow, but yeah, Friday I will have to take off, unfortunately, and I also take weekends off. But if I'm doing my math correctly, we will be done this series tomorrow. And that's pretty cool, but this has been pretty short. I should go through and read this whole thing in full again, just to myself, just to make sure I have everything down that I need to have down. And also go back and reread the TRC, because that thing's a freaking beast. It was fun to do that series. I have to say it was fun, but infuriating, but inspiring and, good stuff. I like it. And that is what these documents should do. Inspire us to act and inspire us to want to learn more. So, yeah, tomorrow, I guess, will be the end of this series. But then after that, I would like to go back to my old wheelhouse and stomping grounds of talking about disability and advocating for people with disabilities. Ding, 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 she says, pointing at herself. And go through with y'all the Access for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the AODA. That's going to be fun, because the AODA is not only a beast, but it's also ambiguously helpful, question mark. But that will be another video for another time, or series of videos for another series of time. All right, so I will see you all tomorrow, and I am done babbling. And have a lovely, wonderful day. Hopefully the weather is nicer where you are than where I am, because we're about to get flooded out. Fun. All right, see you all tomorrow. Bye. Mwah.